welcome if you're just joining us. I'm sure you're all very used to. I should be like Jeremy Paxman at the beginning of University Challenge. He just says, "You all know the rules. Let's just get on with it." But I am going to. Oh, 64. Goodness me, it's jumped. So yeah, I'm sure you all know the rules, or most of you do, unless you're brand new and this is the first event that you've watched so far in the online festival. Please do introduce yourself in the chat. Make sure when you do, I can see a couple of people already have only put hosts and panelists, which is nice because we get to read it, but nobody else does. So if you just make sure that the setting is to everyone rather than to the hosts and panelists. Yeah, I'm back in colour today. I was in black and white last night, but back in colour.
I didn't know you could do that.
From a very snowy Yorkshire. I'm looking out. It stopped snowing, but it is very nice. How many people have we got? We've got just over 70. So I'll just go through the formalities before introducing our speaker, who is Julia. Now, remember that Laura and Tim, they organise the Prophet. They organise the Prophet. They don't organise the Prophet. They organise the festival on a not-for-profit basis. So any donation that you can make would be very much appreciated, just to cover the costs of running it, of paying for the Zoom subscription and the admin. The speakers and the hosts don't get paid anything, but the recommended amount is £5 per talk. And you can still, if you pay 20, you can still feel happy that you've made your contribution if you're planning on watching all of the other talks. And it is still very good value because there's still 3, 4, 5 talks left. I'm sure some of you who have signed up for the open mic will have seen Laura's email earlier. Unfortunately, she's had to cancel that, which is a shame because it gives the opportunity of people kind of coming up with their 3-minute stories. But she said that she didn't have many people or anybody coming forward, but just save your stories until the next time. You never know, it could be in person. So yeah, if you could make a donation, that would be very much appreciated. I'm going to paste the donation link in the chat. Keep your comments coming in the chat. If you've got any questions later on, then put them in the Q&A so we can ask those quite easily to Julia. There are subtitles. I think you can turn the subtitles off should you wish. I think it's a bit trickier in iPad and iPhone, but apart from that, I think you can turn them off. And the webinar is being recorded. And it is, or it will be available on YouTube should you wish to watch it again later. I think I've included everything. I usually forget something, but I think I've included everything there. Now, I'll move straight on to introduce Julia. Hopefully you can see her on your screen. Now, I remember one of the previous virtual festivals included a talk by somebody from Cycling UK, all about the King Alfred's Way. And I suppose that was the official version. What you're going to hear today from Julia is kind of what it's really like. So hopefully positive, but you never know. She could have just come here to reveal all that actually it's nothing like what Cycling UK said, but I assume it is, or somewhere similar. Julia is a novice, or was a novice, when it comes to cycling. I think it was the first time that she'd done a long cycle when she embarked upon the King Alfred's Way. In her life, outside of cycling, she is a speaker, an adventurer, and an author. And if you look behind her left shoulder, you'll be able to see strategically positioned, almost as if she was a politician on those things on the news where they're interviewed on Zoom. She's strategically placed a book, which is called Live Your Bucket List, which is, I would imagine Julie's going to talk about that as well. So without further ado, keep those questions coming. I'm going to disappear. I'll be back towards the end to pose your questions and enjoy the talk. Over to you, Julia.
Thank you very much, Andrew, and good afternoon, everybody. Now, King Alfred's Way. The name is beguiling in itself, but it doesn't tell the whole story. Am I sharing my screen?
Not yet, no.
No, sorry, I suddenly realised that I hadn't done that.
Yep, that's good.
Thank you, that's better. Sorry about that slight technical hitch, everybody. Now I just have another one to deal with. Okay, so the name is beguiling in itself, but it doesn't tell the whole story. The route doesn't just pass King Alfred the Great's birthplace in Wantage and final resting place in Winchester, but sites from throughout England's history. As you cycle King Alfred's Way, you skirt the mystical stones of Stonehenge and Avebury, numerous Iron Age hill forts and 2 cathedral cities. You cross sparkling chalk streams, flanked by flint and thatch cottages. You mount the hulking mass of Salisbury Plain and pick your way along the northern edge of the Berkshire Downs. You descend the gentle Thames Valley and crunch through the gravelly woodlands of Berkshire before sinking into the sandy soils of the Surrey Hills. And finally, you climb onto the unyielding chalk of the South Downs with spectacular views over the English Channel. As soon as I heard about King Alfred's Way, I was hooked. Look, Ali, I said, have you seen this? It's a new cycling route. It's 200 miles long and mainly off-road. Shall we ride it together? Always game, she replied. Okay, let's do it. This talk tells our tale of tackling King Alfred's Way, including what I learnt while training and during the ride itself. If you're an experienced cycle tourer, you'll gain an insight into the route. If you're a novice like me, it'll help you to prepare for any multi-day cycling adventure you're considering. Next time I go cycle touring, I'll do things differently. I'll learn from my mistakes and magnify my successes. By listening to this talk and, of course, reading my new book, you can do the same and your trip will be better for it. I found, while I was cycling, though, that I didn't take very many photos, but I did have a GoPro on my bike, which a friend very kindly lent me. So at the end of each section of talking, I'm going to show a video of that part of the ride to add to the pictures in the slideshow. As Andrew says, I am not a cyclist really. I'm active, but I rarely ride a bike. Before I started this challenge, I was not remotely cycle fit. I didn't even have a functioning bike. Alison, on the other hand, on the right side of this picture, is a keen mountain biker. She's incredibly fit and she cycles a lot. Luckily, she and her partner Bob offered to lend me one of their spare bikes to train on, which I'm holding here. Even better, he decided that he'd build me a bike from scratch for the ride itself, which was fantastic. But first, before we started riding, we needed to do some planning. Ali wanted to complete the route in 4 days. I was horrified. 54 miles a day off-road. I'd be a quivering wreck. Luckily, Bob intervened. You could both manage that, he said, quite generously, I thought, given how little I cycled. But you wouldn't have time to stop for tea and cake. They were the magic words. It was settled. We'd aim for 5 days and Ali got to eat cake. There was still the minor issue of getting cycling fit to contend with, though. This is us looking pristine before setting out on our first training ride together. And here we are after the ride. It was my first experience of cycling without mudguards. I knew that mountain bikers got sticky brown stripes up their backs like this, but hadn't realised that they eat dirt too. I just hope that it was just dirt that was flying up from the wheels. During my first week of training, neither the mountain bike nor my ancient hybrid bike were ready to ride, so I booked myself onto a couple of spinning classes. Alison swears by these to improve her cycling fitness. I hated spinning from the first class. The bikes have pegs and levers all over the place, and I had no idea how to set them. I hadn't realised that barefoot shoes would be so painful on the pedals and didn't have any others to wear. Being subjected to ceaseless thumping music in a confined space is my idea of torture. Why do it to yourself when you could be out in the fresh air riding a real bike? I just had to trust Alison on the value of this one. Things did get better when Bob taught me how to set up the bike properly, and Alison lent me a pair of cycling shoes with a rigid sole. But I still had no idea why anyone would choose to do this. On the day of my final class, I was in a foul mood. The last thing I wanted to do was to go spinning. I set off reluctantly, walking from home with my head down, muttering to myself about how unfair life is. I was not looking forward to it. When the music started, I was still in a real grump. It was a new instructor, nicknamed the Queen of Hover, and she had us up on our feet, pedalling fast, hovering just above the saddle for a large part of the class. To my surprise, I was glad of that practice later as I careened down long slopes on King Alfred's Way, hovering over the dropped seat. Although the Queen of Hover was young, she had chosen a 1980s playlist, and it took me back to my teenage years. By about halfway through the class, I realised that my head was up and I was mentally singing along, thinking about how much fun it was. What a difference a bit of exercise and some great music can make. After a couple of spinning classes, it was time to dust down my trusty and rusty old bike, which you can see here. I bought it 30 years ago and have only ridden it sporadically. I hadn't used it recently. It was literally covered in dust and cobwebs. The chain was dry and the tyres completely flat. I brushed it down, oiled the chain and pumped up the tyres. I tested the brakes and they seemed to be working all right. That's as good as it gets with these old rim brakes. Although it's a hybrid bike, I wasn't going to be able to use it to train off-road on the Malvern Hills where I was living at the time. The brakes are just not good enough to stop me on steep slopes. So I chose flatter roads around the base of the hills instead. On my first outing, I set a baseline. I cycled in a fairly straight line from home for 30 minutes to see how far I could get in an hour. I was pleased with the result. It was 12 miles on that first outing in the hour, not the 30 minutes. And the distance steadily increased as I trained. As my training progressed, my body got used to sitting on a bike and my legs got used to hauling me around. On the bigger, steeper hills, I still had to get off and push, but my confidence and ability were already improving uphill and down. It was time to start training off-road. Now, if you're not familiar with the Malvern Hills, this slide and the next one give you some idea of how steep they are. This was my training ground. Stunningly beautiful, but punishing on the legs and the lungs. Bob lent me his old but still very good mountain bike, this one here. This was my first day out on the hills, and I cautiously set off up the track from the car park. There's nothing but up, really, for most of the Malvern Hills, or down. Within only a couple of minutes, I was gasping for breath. I just couldn't get the amount of oxygen I needed into my body. It was time to stop and admire the view. I'm an expert at using transferable skills. It's an age-old tactic that every hill walker knows well. The training session continued in much the same vein. Cycle for a bit, dismount, catch my breath, push, cycle a bit more, as you'll see in the video from my training. The final descent off the hills was hellish. The path is narrow with steep switchbacks that are way beyond my capability. So I spent more time off the bike as I negotiated the tight bends. To add to the challenge, the switchback path is particularly popular with walkers. It was a very slow descent. My heart was pounding and my legs were wobbling like blancmange as I arrived back at the car. I was relieved to be back in one piece. On my second outing to the hills, I found out how to brake an unbreakable bike. As he lifted the bike out of our car, my husband grabbed the front brake lever Afterwards, I couldn't fit the front wheel on. The brake pads had clamped together. Not wanting to admit to Bob what had happened, I called up a different mountain biking friend for advice. He told me that if I couldn't just pull them apart with gentle persuasion, I should take the bike into a bike shop where they might be able to lever them apart. The only trouble was, I learnt, levering them can break the whole mechanism. So my heart was in my mouth, but luckily, this mechanic from Dirtworks in West Malvern was on hand to resolve the situation. I was back in business. I quickly realised that training on the Malvern Hills was going to be useful for building some off-road skills, but I was never going to spend hours on my bike on the hills because it was just so difficult. So I had to think of somewhere else to train that would give me plenty of time to get used to being in a saddle or on a saddle. After pondering this for a while, the perfect route came to mind, the local canal towpath. The surface of the path is varied, not all as easygoing as this section. And there are 59 locks along this section of the canal, so it's not as flat as you might expect either. Not long into my first canal towpath ride, pain started to shoot up my arms. My hands were already bruised and my neck gradually stiffened. My toes felt like they were pushing against red hot coals. I started to worry. How would I manage cycling for hour after hour, day after day, when I hurt so much after cycling for just a couple of hours? Lying on the grass here and waving my feet above my head sorted out the problem with my toes. As for everything else, I just had to give myself a good talking to. I was quite a long way from home by this point. I needed to suck it up and keep the pedals turning to get my hours in and make it home. When I talked to Ali about it later, she told me to relax and stop gripping the handlebars so tightly and not to slump forwards over them either. It was good advice that worked. The pain in my arms and neck went away. On my way back down the locks, I was climbing a short uphill section to summit a tunnel when I discovered a second way to break an unbreakable bike. I briefly heard a grinding noise and then lost all power. When I looked down, I could see the chain dangling off the sprockets. I realised that something had fallen off, so I crouched down to start a fingertip search of the gravel path. I wasn't hopeful that I'd find the missing link. It was smaller than the gravel and a similar colour. But to my astonishment, after just a few seconds, I did find it. I didn't actually know what to do with it, having found it, so I popped it into my pocket and then checked how far away I was from the train station. Okay, it would take me 3 to 4 hours to walk back, which is a long way pushing a bike. So pondering the situation, I looked up and spotted 2 people cycling towards me. Yes, aha, maybe they know how to fix the chain, I thought. And they did. They had a chain repair kit with them, but they didn't have any spare links of the right size. Apparently, the piece that I'd already found, that you can see in my hand here, was only half of what had fallen off. This time, 3 of us dropped down to our hands and knees to hunt for the other half. Found it. What tremendously good luck. Not only did I find the missing part, but it was the connecting link that had come apart, so it was fairly easy to put back on. Back home, I reflected on what I had learned. I remembered that you can break the chain by changing gear when it's under pressure. I knew this as a child, but I'd forgotten. It's easy enough to reduce the tension at the right time and it all came back to me quite naturally once I'd remembered to do it. A bit like riding a bike, really. Okay, so I'm just going to stop sharing my screen for a moment and then share a movie instead. I've been going for less than 5 minutes on my first training ride. up onto the Malvern Hills, and I'm already using the view as an excuse for my first break. It seems that training on the Malvern Hills isn't getting me an awful lot of saddle time. I'm spending a lot of time pushing the bike up hills that I just can't manage yet. Oh well, I guess that's why you do training. There are some bits that I've been able to cycle rather than push, I'm glad to say. Slightly easier cycling today. Certainly easier than going up the Malverns. Freshly laid gravel! No! So that was the training complete. At some point, I was going to have to actually start the cycle itself. So on to King Alfred's Way itself. Day one was cycling from Winchester to Market Lavington. This is Westgate in Winchester, where the ride starts. There's a pedestrian precinct in the middle of the city. So the route isn't quite a complete circuit. It starts here and finishes at the King Alfred statue at the other end of the pedestrian precinct. By the time we arrived, it was already almost lunchtime. We had about 8 hours of daylight left and at least 7 hours of cycling before we expected to arrive at our overnight stop. We didn't have lamps with us, so we were cutting things pretty fine. Having not taken lamps on this trip, my advice would be not to make the same mistake. Needing to arrive before dark added unnecessary stress to the day, and as you'll see in future slides, we could have done with improved visibility at other times on the ride as well. The route starts with a bit of a wiggle through Winchester, but it's not long before you reach quiet lanes and the countryside. This section of the path was generally surfaced, so I didn't have to concentrate on the riding too much. The route passes through picture postcard English villages and crosses sparkling clear chalk streams. I thought I might have found heaven. Alison, on the other hand, was not so keen. She loves the challenge of cycling across difficult terrain, so found all of the sections of road riding in King Alfred's Way rather boring. The guidebook warns of a tricky climb out of Broughton. It's a steep off-road section with a damp, rooty surface. Alison powered ahead, full of beans and delighting in a bit of off-road cycling. I tried to emulate her energy, but didn't make it to the top in one. I was proud of myself for not pushing though. I simply stopped, caught my breath and set off again. Alison had to teach me how to set off again by dropping my seat and starting diagonally if I do have to stop on a hill. But at least that meant that I didn't have to push the bike all the way to the top. From the top, the route follows a Roman road. The track gently drops for miles. What a wonderful reward after the climb up. As we approached the northern edge of Salisbury, I was anticipating a great view of Old Sarum. You cycle straight towards it. I was disappointed. Instead, the best views were to be seen behind us as we climbed the gentle slope away from this spectacular hill fort. So it's well worth stopping at this point and turning around to catch the view. Cycling away from Salisbury without having seen it, I pondered about whether we should have allowed extra time to explore the places that we passed a little bit more rather than simply focusing on the journey. For the next few miles, I kept my eyes peeled for a view of Stonehenge. I've seen it many times before, but was disappointed that I failed in my quest that day. Time was pressing, so when we realised that we'd missed it, we didn't turn back. Past Stonehenge, the landscape changes significantly. All those pretty villages are replaced by homogeneous army camps and the delightful valleys by the hulk of Salisbury Plain, which is a firing range. We passed some signs indicating that the firing ranges were in use and that the road was closed. We thought that the bit we were supposed to be cycling on was still open, but we weren't totally sure. Highly alert, we cycled on, looking and listening for any life-threatening activity. The further we cycled, the more rattled we became. Another red flag alongside the path dissolved our resolve. We dove off route down to the safety of a village. At this stage, even Alison preferred cycling along quiet country lanes to braving the ranges. Looking at the maps again afterwards, I'm pretty sure that we could have continued, but pretty sure was not enough when getting it wrong could have been deadly. We just squeaked into our accommodation at the Green Dragon in Market Lavington before it got dark. I have never been so pleased to finish for the day. I was absolutely exhausted. As we collapsed onto our beds, Ali asked me how many miles the book had said we had to do that day. I answered 45. Her GPS said that we had ridden 52 miles, which is far more than expected. We were going to sleep well. As an aside, you'll notice that our bikes are in the room with us here. The owner of the Green Dragon is a cyclist herself, so understands about bike security, and she was happy for us to store them in our room, and that meant that we could sleep easy. Okay, I'm just going to share the movie from day one, if you bear with me for a moment. So on day 2, we travelled from Market Lavington to Sparsholt, which is near Wantage. For that day, rain was forecast for the whole day, and it was drizzling by the time we set off. So we pulled on our waterproof jackets and covered our rucksacks. Market Lavington is below Salisbury Plain, and the route is on top. So the first 500 metres of the day were uphill and punishing. As I gasped my way to the top, Ali disappeared off into the distance like she did a lot when we were cycling. I stopped, caught my breath, started again, a familiar pattern by now. By the time I reached the top, steam was rising out of my jacket and I was about to explode with the heat that I generated. That was the last time I wore a waterproof jacket cycling, rain or no rain. We rose from drizzle into cloud. The views to the north are purportedly excellent at this point, but alas, they were non-existent for us. The track down off the plain to the village of Chilton is way beyond my capability as a rider. It's deeply rutted and chalky, so exceptionally slick when wet as it was that day. The clay surrounding the chalk flew up in clumps and caked everything, including my face, as I tried to control my slipping tyres. My heart was in my mouth all the way down. And when I arrived at the bottom, I took a deep breath, so pleased to have got there in one piece. My shiny new bike was well and truly christened by this point. A few hundred meters further along, we were on a smoother track and I could hear grinding. I asked Ali what was wrong and she diagnosed it as gears not indexing properly. Bob, who'd built the bike and lent it to me, talked me through the fix. If you get it wrong, you could completely mess things up. I tried to persuade Ali to do the fix, but she wouldn't hear of it. We were both cowards. I followed Bob's instructions as closely as I could. No change. Did you count like you said you should? Ali piped up. Well, sort of. It was hard to concentrate on counting, turning the knob and cycling at the same time. You numpty, counting's crucial or you could break the gears. Deep breath. I tried again. Now the gears wouldn't engage at all. I envisioned Bob having to come out and rescue us. One more attempt and it improved. A few minutes later, there was no grinding noise at all. Thank goodness for good luck and having technical support on hand. For me, Avebury was a huge disappointment. We'd hoped for lunch and cake at the National Trust Cafe and that we would see the stones as we cycled past on our way out of town. The cafe was closed and pre-wrapped sandwiches and tea from a machine in the village shop just didn't hit the mark, and Ali didn't get any cake. To top it all, you don't see much of the stones on your way out of the town either. I would highly recommend stopping here, taking the time to walk into the stone circle before cycling on. It's a magical place and worth taking a few minutes out to appreciate. As you can probably tell, this is not one of my photos. For a start, the sky's blue, but we didn't get such a good view of the stones either. It's a long slog from Avebury back up onto the Ridgeway or up onto the Ridgeway, and things did not improve when we were up there. The name suggests a path that follows a ridge. It isn't. It's actually a series of ridges, so the route frequently dips down into gaps and climbs back out. In many places, the track itself is also a series of deep, narrow ruts, which you can get some idea of in this picture, separated by equally narrow ridges. The ruts are tricky to stay in without hitting the edges, and the ridges are tricky to stay on without slipping off one side or the other. It's hard going. And of course, we were still in cloud, as you can see. I hear that the views to the north are stunning, but again, we saw nothing but the track ahead. Having said that, we did still manage to muster a smile or two. We arrived at the Star Inn at Sparsholt. Excuse me, my light is just doing something funny. If you bear with me for a moment, I'll try and sort it out. Right, I'll just turn it off. We arrived at the Star Inn at Sparsholt, covered in mud and completely exhausted. Luckily, they were totally relaxed about the state that we were in. The bartender, this man here, even insisted on cleaning down our bikes for us before removing his bike from the cellar so that ours could be kept safely under lock and key. Okay, so let's have a look at the movie from this day. I'm in my very nice hotel room looking out. Not particularly looking forward to the idea of cycling all day in the rain. Oh my goodness, what a way to start the day. 100 metres uphill, straight from the village that we were staying in. No opportunity to warm up. And even though it's raining, I've learned that I can't cycle in a waterproof jacket. This is often what my view has been like, with Alison pedalling away up the hill in front of me and me stopping to catch my breath. I haven't had to stop and push yet though. I've always got back on and cycled further. I think the bike's been well and truly christened now. A lot of the route today has either been in narrow gullies, and this one isn't particularly narrow in the grand scheme of things, or on narrow ridges in between the gullies. So although the gradient isn't that difficult to cycle over, you're concentrating all the time about exactly where your tyres are going. Sadly, we're on the ridgeway, but we have no views because we're basically cycling through the cloud. Slightly easier cycling here though, on a wide track. Ali tells me that in mountain biking, this is called picking your battles. She probably could have cycled up it, but actually we've got a lot further to go yet today, so we need to be fit for the rest of the journey as well. We're cycling here through the middle of an Iron Age hill fort. You can just see the ramparts. I'm just about to cycle through, and then it'll be downhill for a little while, which is quite good. Of course, after a nice long downhill stretch comes a not so nice long uphill stretch. Well signed, the ridgeway. It's great. You can cycle along without having to check your directions too frequently. I've been a little bit freaked out by some of these narrow channels today, including one just back there. So I've just put myself on one side where it's a bit wider. As you can tell from the background noise, I'm braking rather more than my friend Alison in front of me. We've arrived, we're at the Star Inn at Sparsholt. We've arrived at our accommodation at the end of day 2. We've had a slightly muddy day, as you can see. I dread to think what that side looks like. They've asked us not to sit on the bed until we've had our showers. I have no doubt at all that Ali could have cycled up that hill fort. As you'll see on a later day, she's a bit good at hills. Okay, so on to our third day. By the time we climbed back onto the ridgeway, the clouds had lifted and there were occasional bursts of sunshine, which helped to increase my enjoyment. The cycling is less demanding on this stretch of the ridgeway. The ruts are smaller and there are a lot of downhill stretches. Freewheeling down into Streatley, I found myself smiling. I was feeling good and the gentle Thames Valley laid ahead. It was time for our first, and as it happens, only cake stop. From Goring to Reading, the path follows the Thames flowing downhill. It doesn't exactly hug the river, but it is easy cycling. However, at this point, our rhythm was seriously disrupted as we constantly had to stop to navigate now we weren't on the ridgeway any longer. We were using the OS Maps app, and it showed us where we were and where we needed to go, but it doesn't show you sort of as you're going along. So I recommend getting a GPS that's designed for cyclists to show you which way to go as you reach a junction, so that you don't have to keep stopping. I could smell and hear Reading before I saw it. The route loops around this busy town to avoid dangerous roads, I assume. We ignored the first loop and cycled through the traffic. It was heavy, but it wasn't fast, so it didn't feel too risky. The next loop seemed more sensible to follow because the alternative is a fast multi-lane A road. As we cycled these extra miles through dull urban fringe, I couldn't see any merit in the loop except for avoiding the main road, especially as heavy lorries were thundering past us on this country road. Where the loop rejoins the A road, we could see a cycle path that ran directly back to the town centre. It would have been far safer and shorter to stick to the A road. Our language was blue as we joined the cycle path and headed south. From this point forwards, I started to look more closely at the route ahead and question some of the loops. Some of them are clearly there for a reason, but others seem to have been created just so that they could make the route 350 kilometres long rather than 344 or whatever. Now let's have a look at the movie from day 3. So day 4, from Fleet to Liss. Have you ever noticed how much of a difference it makes to your mood when the sun shines? Well, I was smiling much more on this stretch of the path. But this particular smile is more of a grimace. It was just after my first crash of the day. We rolled gently down into this quiet valley and onto this bridge. I couldn't resist a quick peek at the wide, shallow stream of water glinting in the sun. As my eyes drifted, so did my bike. Bang! My front wheel hit one of the wooden uprights and stopped dead. Luckily, the bridge was solid. Less luckily, I slid forward at speed and hit my pubis on the handlebar post. I gasped, cursed, and grimaced, hoping for some endorphins to kick in and kill the pain. The bridge and the bike were both fine, but I seriously wondered whether I'd done myself some damage. I didn't want Ali to know quite how much pain I was in. So I laughed, I took this selfie and tried to hold a normal conversation with her while the pain subsided. I gently tiptoed my bike across the rest of the bridge and eased myself back into the saddle. Good, I could cycle, no broken bones. I rode through the Surrey Hills gleefully, quietly chuckling to myself. I don't know whether it was the familiarity of the landscape laden with happy childhood memories, the sunshine, or Ali's good mood that was making me so happy. Dragonflies darted around us as we stopped here for a break at Frensham Ponds, one of our teenage hangouts. The ground was now sandy, slowing us down. In some places, we both had to get off and push. Yes, both of us. Even a cycling ninja like Alison couldn't cope with tyres sinking ankle deep into soft sand. The thought of cycling up the Devil's Punch Bowl at Hindhead had been looming in my mind all morning. It's reputed to be one of the hardest climbs of the route. Ali and I were powering uphill for some time before we saw this sign and realised that's where we were. What a result! We were already halfway up. And when we reached the top, I found myself grinning from ear to ear. As did Ali. What an achievement! A few miles further on Bramshot Common, Ali suddenly whooped and disappeared. Rather than blindly following, I stopped to consider what laid ahead. She was already a long way down the steepest slope on the route yet. I watched her careen around the bend at the bottom. The momentum carried her a long way up the next slope before she had to start pedaling again. Wow. But there was no way I could follow at that speed. I decided instead to go slowly with some modicum of control. Bad idea. It didn't take me long to discover that if you brake on a steep sandy hill, your back tyre will try to overtake your front one. As slowly and with as little control as thick, sticky treacle dripping off a spoon, I dropped to the ground in slow motion, as you'll see on the next video. The deep, soft sand broke my fall, so I wasn't hurt, but I have to say my pride did take another beating. I quickly lifted the bike up and reassessed my strategy. Going slowly was clearly not the best plan, so I steeled myself, took a deep breath, and let go of the brakes. Stay on the bike, Julia, stay on the bike. The path twists before reaching the bottom. I felt my face contort in concentration and tried not to think about what would happen if I crashed at this speed. I flew out of the turn and away up towards Ali. Success! Ali was waiting for me. She laughed when I told her what had happened. You crashed again? On that slope? But this was not the last chance Ali had to laugh at me crashing. The best was yet to come. She didn't have to wait for long. A short while later, I was cycling in the lead. The ground was flat and the path was wide enough not to have to concentrate too hard. Oh, look, I thought, there's a twig across the path. That's okay, my bike can handle that. I cycled on. My brain woke up. That's not a twig, it's a slow worm. I wouldn't want to hurt a slow worm. How can I avoid it? Oh no, it's not a slow worm, it's an adder. If I hurt it, it'll bite Ali. What can I do? No space to cycle around it. I know, I'll bunny hop over it. I have no idea where that last thought came from. I've never bunny hopped a bike in my entire life. But I was milliseconds away from hitting the snake and there was no time to hatch another plan. So I lifted the front wheel and jumped. Yes, I'm in the air, I missed it. Crash. I somersaulted through the air. My back smashed into the ground. My legs twisted awkwardly under the bike frame. I did a quick limb check. Nothing bent at an unhealthy angle, no blood and no significant pain. Good. I looked up to see Ali on the path behind me, chortling. To be fair, I would have done exactly the same in her position. Ali controlled her laughter for long enough to reassure me that I had missed the snake. It was as shocked as I was to find my bike in mid-air above it and rapidly slithered off into the undergrowth unhurt. There was no obvious damage to the bike either, so I picked myself and it up, rearranged both into the correct order and continued along the track, chuckling at myself and hoping that crashing wasn't going to be my new normal. Okay, so let's have a look at the movie for day 4. Sadly, that wasn't caught on film. So the final day dawned. I was determined that my last day of riding would not be marred by more falls. We'd be cycling on hard, rocky ground now, so falling off would hurt far more than yesterday's tumbles into soft sand. So in the morning, I pictured myself staying on my bike all day. I knew to expect some challenging climbs onto the South Downs, so I also pictured myself cycling up the hills without stopping. That was definitely a matter of optimism over experience, but I figured that it was worth a try. As we approached the South Downs, my heart sank. They loomed above us, and they don't form a continuous ridge. We were going to have more than one big climb that day. And of course, with every big climb, there's a big descent. In my determination to stay on, I was nervous on the steep downhill sections. And I found myself tensing my arms and braking even more than normal. As soon as I became aware that I was doing it, I started a new mantra: relax, Julia. Heading uphill, my mantra was different. You can do this, Julia. Ali, I did it in a oneer. Alison chuckled. Well done. I told you you could. You just have to believe in yourself. Proclaiming my success gave me a boost, so poor Ali had to suffer the same announcement at the top of every hill for the rest of the day. Well, almost every hill. There was one that completely defeated me. The climb up from Queen Elizabeth Country Park is steep, grassy, and long. Very long. For reference, this is not the top. It looks like the top from the bottom, but it isn't. I didn't have the heart or the lungs to tackle it, especially when Ali stopped to take a call. I got off and pushed as she chatted on the phone, and then watched in awe as she cycled all the way to the top. As you'll see in the video, she simply refused to give up. Navigation was easy once we reached the South Downs Way National Trail because there are way markers at every junction. The track is mainly wide and undemanding except for the hills, so I relaxed and admired the view. And what a view it is! The English Channel shimmered off to our left and the Sussex Downs rolled away to our right, with the ridge of the South Downs marching ahead, all under a clear blue sky. It was England at its most magnificent. Sadly, the route into Winchester itself was not quite as magnificent. If you follow the correct route, you won't see this sign. We got a bit carried away with following the South Downs Way signs and missed the point at which the King Alfred's Way splits from the South Downs Way. So we ended up following the latter all the way into the city. As we neared the city, the countryside turned into urban fringe with piles of dog poo on the path, litter in the margins, and heavy traffic thundering past. It was not pleasant. Once we reached the buildings, though, it was only a short distance to the city centre and King Alfred's statue. As we approached, I took a video and my voice cracked with emotion. We made it. When I walked the southwest coast path, there was never a time when I doubted my ability to complete it. 200 miles on a bike appears to be less challenging than 600 on foot. But there were a couple of days cycling King Alfred's Way when not only did I think maybe we wouldn't finish, but also I had no interest in finishing. It's only because I was with Alison that I completed the circuit. She would not have contemplated defeat, despite not particularly enjoying the on-road bits of the ride. As usual, with any challenge, after the initial elation of completing it, there was an air of anticlimax. After all we had left to do was to wash dog poo off our tyres and drink tea while we waited for Bob to give us a lift home. No more challenges and no more triumphs for now.
Hi, Julia. Oh, sorry.
Heading towards the South Downs this morning, I can see a really steep high ridge in front of me, and I have a nasty suspicion that that's what it is. I love this section of road. It feels like a really old way where millions of people, thousands of people have walked down here or driven their carts down here in the past, or even ridden their mountain bikes down here. If you look over there, that's the South Downs, and the thing that has struck us most about that view of the South Downs is that it's not a nice straight ridge. So when we get up there, there's going to be a lot of up and down, not just up to get on there. Where do you reckon we're going now?
Down.
All the way to Winchester?
All the way.
Nice gentle gradient?
Definitely.
Yeah! Ali and I do tortoise racing sometimes on hills. I'm doing about, I don't know, 2 miles an hour. And she's just creeping past me. She always beats me though. We're here up in the South Downs. I made it all the way to the top without stopping for breath. Just heading towards the grassy climb out of Queen Elizabeth Country Park back onto the South Downs. Looks like it's going to be a bit of a slog. The top of that grassy slope is like sandy, chalky rubble. I'm struggling to walk up it and push the bike, let alone actually try to cycle it. Here comes Alison. I'm very impressed with the way she can slog up a hill on a bike. I'm afraid I was definitely pushing this bit. And she's still going. We've seen a few people out on electric bikes up here on the South Downs Way, and frankly, I can't say I blame them. Rolling along the South Downs Way now towards Winchester. Fairly close now, within 10 miles. Winchester, and I hope that you can see the statue where we started in front of us. I can't believe we made it. If you've enjoyed listening to my talk today and would like to know more about cycling King Alfred's Way, then this is your lucky day. In March, I'm going to be launching my book, Cycling King Alfred's Way, A Piece of Cake. And I'm recruiting members of the launch team today. Every member of the launch team will receive a pre-publication PDF of the book. All I ask you to do in return is to buy a copy during launch week, when the ebook will only be 99p. And leave an honest review. Everyone from the Cycle Touring Festival who signs up to the launch team today will also have access to a special offer. For one day only, Saturday the 19th of February 2022, anyone who joins the launch team will also receive a free audio copy of my best-selling book, Live Your Bucket List, which is the book that Andrew referred to earlier. If you haven't been on a launch team before, don't worry, I'll make everything clear as we go along. So if you're interested, take out your phones, turn the camera on and scan this QR code now. Or if you don't have your phone to hand, head over to www.juliags.com/KAW. Once you've done that, please keep an eye out for the welcome email, which will be sent automatically as soon as you join the team. If it's not in your inbox, please check your junk folders, etc., and whitelist the address. Thank you so much for your attention this afternoon. And I'm conscious of the fact that I've taken a little bit more time than we'd allocated, but I hope that we do have some time for some questions.
Thank you, Julia. That was excellent. Thank you. That was, I mentioned earlier that there was a talk given by Cycling UK about that route last year, and I think it was nice to hear it from the perspective of somebody who wasn't just publicising the route, which was interesting. Now, we're going to crack on. We've only got just over 10 minutes. There were lots of questions regarding the type of bike. You were on a mountain bike. Those shots from the GoPro from the handlebar of your bike actually gave a good view of the tracks that you were cycling on. Lots of people wondering if it would be possible on a touring bike.
Okay, I don't know very much about bikes, but we met lots of other people cycling the route as we went along. People were either using gravel bikes or mountain bikes on it. Some of the routes have, some of the paths have really sharp flints all over the paths. Personally, I wouldn't want to do it on a road bike at all. So I was really glad of having really chunky tyres. And also we had those tyres that can't get punctures. Can't remember what they're called now.
Schwalbe Marathon Plus.
Is that what they are?
Yep.
So self-healing tyres.
Sorry, no. You mean tubeless tyres?
Tubeless tyres, thank you. Goes to show how much I know about cycling. Yes, tubeless tyres. And we did meet some people at a cafe on our way round who it had taken them 2 hours to actually cycle back up onto the route one morning because they were in a party of 8 people and 6 of them had got punctures, multiple punctures, and they'd had to stop and fix all of these punctures before they could carry on anywhere, and it had taken them hours. So I was really glad that that we didn't have to worry about that, at least.
In fairness to Cycling UK, who came up with the route, they actually did make it as a bikepacking, mountain biking route, I think. So it was never really intended as a route where you would just take perhaps a standard touring bike. I think if you got very fat tyres or reasonably fat tyres, then you would be okay.
The official guidebook, I think, says gravel bike or mountain bike, if I remember rightly.
Yeah. The eternal question of clockwise or anti-clockwise has cropped up. Which way did you do it, and would you recommend that way?
Okay, I did it clockwise, and Cycling UK say there's a good reason for that. It's because the ascents and descents just work better for cyclists that way round. So I trusted them. The guidebook, which is on my bookshelf here, I perhaps should have had it ready. It's a bit tatty now, but the official guidebook only has that way round sort of in there. Although, of course, if you download the GPX file, you can cycle it either way.
And is it signposted?
No, it's not. And that made quite a big difference to us. So on the top of a hill in the clouds somewhere, another cyclist came up behind us, and he had a useful little thing on his handlebar that just had an arrow that told him which way to go. And I really wish we'd had one of those, because particularly coming down through Surrey and Berkshire, there are lots of little paths that aren't at a very different angle to each other. And we basically at every junction we were stopping to check that we were going the right way, which the OS Maps app did the job of showing us which way to go. But it meant that we had to keep stopping and starting, and we really lost our flow during that part of the route. So I would recommend getting something like that that tells you where to go as you're cycling.
Yeah, that answers the question somebody's asked about the navigation system that you use. I think you just answered that.
Yeah.
Accommodation. Was there lots of accommodation? I mean, it's the south of England, so I think I know what the answer is to that. But did you
might think so.
Did you book everything in advance, or?
Yes, we did book in advance. We only booked 2 nights of accommodation because Alison lives on the route, so we stayed at her house for a couple of nights as well. One of the reasons we stayed at her house for 2 nights instead of just the night when we cycled past is because we couldn't get accommodation on our last night at all, because is it Goodwood? There's a big racing circuit about 20 miles away from the route, but all of the accommodation locally was booked up, so we weren't able to get it, and we had to be collected and taken back to her house and then dropped off again in the morning at Liss. So I would recommend making sure that you've got your accommodation booked if that's how you're going to do it.
Anne, who I know very well, lives here in Yorkshire. She asks, would there be any opportunities to wild camp, do you think?
There were some people that we met on the way who were wild camping. Of course, you need to bear in mind the legal restrictions on doing so. But they seemed to find their way around doing that. And actually, there's a major advantage of wild camping over the way that we did it, in that the accommodation's always down off the hill, so you have to go back up. If you're wild camping, you can just stay up there on the ridge, but then you have to carry more. So,
and you did it in 5 days. Would you recommend that as the optimal number of days to do it in? Is that what was recommended by the book?
oh
Do you
gosh,
wish you'd had more days?
that all just depends on how good a cyclist you are. It was, or how experienced a cyclist you are. It was fine for us. We met people who were doing it in 3, 4, and 5 days as we were cycling. The 3-day people were obviously, really serious athletes. The 5-day people were more people like me who, or maybe most of them did a bit more cycling than me, but who are fairly fit, but not really into ultra sports.
And how different, you must have had an impression of what it would be like before setting off. Was it similar to how you expected, or was it very different?
There were more on-road stretches than I was expecting. The book says it's 60% on-road, and I guess that somebody must have done 60% off. Oh, I can't remember now which way around it is. Anyway, we concluded, certainly at the end of the first day, that there was more on-road than off-road that day. Whether that continued, it probably didn't continue the whole time, but there was a bit more on road than I'd expected. For me, that was absolutely fine. I was very happy cycling on the roads. None of them were busy, apart from in Reading, but the other roads were all, really minor roads, and I had no problem cycling on them at all. And in fact, I really enjoyed that because I didn't have to concentrate on what I was doing with the bike the whole time. Alison found the road bits really dull. So, it depends on your preference as to whether that will work for you.
I've just put the link to your website in the chat box again. Sharon has asked me to do that, but what was the bit on the end of the URL which directed people towards the particular page?
It was KAW, King Alfred's Way.
Okay.
So juliags.com/KAW.
Okay, so if you add /KAW to what I've posted in the chat, that should work. A couple more things. Somebody's complimented you quite rightly on your ability to tell the story, and they want to know, if I can find the question very quickly, have you recorded any audio books? I think it might be interesting for you actually to mention the book which is on your shelf behind you.
Yeah.
And is that connected with what you've just done? Is it one of your bucket list items to go off for 5 days around the South Downs?
It was. I mean, the first time I read about King Alfred's Way, I was absolutely hooked on the idea of cycling it, even though I'm not a cyclist. There was just something about it. Reading an article, it was just when it was launched, and there were articles in all sorts of magazines about it. And as soon as I read about it, I thought, yes, I want to do that. So yes, I added it to my bucket list. So my book is called Live Your Bucket List. And I do link the King Alfred's Way, Cycling King Alfred's Way book to the techniques in here to turn something that's on your list of things you've always wanted to do into reality. So this is a step-by-step guide for doing that. And it includes, if you've enjoyed my storytelling today, it includes a lot of stories from when I walked the Southwest Coast Path in 2020 in this book as well. To go back to the question about audiobooks, I have recorded this as an audiobook. And if you join the King Alfred's Way launch team today, then you will receive an entirely free copy of the audiobook of Live Your Bucket List. So that will be in your welcome email.
So am I right in thinking the book you've got in your hand there, it's not about your own personal bucket list, it is a kind of a guide to making to helping other people realize their own bucket list, is that correct?
It tells stories from me living my bucket list, but the purpose behind it is that it's a guide. So in each chapter there are some of my stories, and then step by step guide as to how you can employ those same tactics in your life to make your dreams come true as well, and to do those things you've always wanted to.
And just to finish with then, have you got any more cycles as yet uncompleted, or that you haven't done on your bucket list for the next 20, 30 years?
Well, there are 2 that are on my bucket list at the moment. Oh no, 3. This is what bucket lists are like. It grows exponentially. But the coast to coast, or the sea to sea, sorry, it's not coast to coast, is it, for cycling? So I really fancy doing that. When I heard that you could cycle from the Channel down to the Med through France, I think you can do it along canals. Anyway, I've really fancied the idea of doing that. And a few years ago, one of my friends cycled around the Baltic Sea. And I thought, oh, that sounds like a good trip.
Yeah.
So yes, all those three are on the list. And no doubt other people will suggest other things that will get added to it as well.
Well, that's my plan for this summer, is to cycle around the Baltic Sea.
Oh, is it?
Albeit missing a few bits out because I've got to do it in 2 months. But yeah, perhaps more of that at next year's festival.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I think we've exhausted all the questions. So thank you for that. I think it was a very informative talk, and hopefully people will engage with what you're trying to do with your new book, and good luck with that when it comes out. So thank you for everybody for taking part and for commenting and listening. And in 45 minutes time, Simon Parker will be here to talk all about his book, which was about riding around Britain during the pandemic. So come back in precisely 45 minutes to see that. Remember that the open mic for tonight has been cancelled, unfortunately, but there are more talks tomorrow. And if you go to the Cycle Touring website, you can Cycle Touring Festival website, you can find out details of all of those. So lots of people, you can see them, hopefully, Julia. Lots of people are thanking you. I thought it was a good talk, great talk. So thank you, and good luck with your bucket list.
Thank you very much, Andrew, and thank you for having me to talk at the festival.
Okay, thank you, and see everybody soon.